Welcome back to continuing election coverage from the largest newsroom in the West, where we are marshaling all of our resources to bring you up-to-the-minute data and results as election night continues. I'm joined here by our political writer, Robin Epkarian. Hi, Robin.
Hi, David. Nice to be here.
Yes, indeed. And we've got the ever-changing big board right in front of us. Let's run through some of the things that we know are going on. Remember, you can play along at home at latimes.com. All of the interactive maps that we're looking at here are available online. Anything that's dark blue or dark red has been called. Let's go all the way up into the state of Maine up here, where clearly that is in the Obama camp. Working our way down through New England, we can see Vermont, also Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and then let's come on down a little bit more where we can get in here into Maryland. These are all solidly in the Obama camp at this point. They have been called for the president. Republican challenger Mitt Romney, meanwhile, doing very well in this cluster here. Indiana, Kentucky, Tennessee, that's a new one, South Carolina, and West Virginia right here. All have been called for Republican challenger Mitt Romney. And over here, this just came up within the last few seconds. Illinois is being called for President Obama. That brings us at the moment 64 electoral votes for the president, 51 electoral votes for Mitt Romney. Takes 270 to get there, so Robin, we've got a long ways to go still.
Oh yeah, I think the nation's on pins and needles. I know we are in the newsroom.
One thing I'd like to focus on for a sec, I mean, when we look at Mitt Romney, who clearly has broad backing at the moment among the various stripes of Republicans that are out there. That wasn't always the case.
Oh no, Mitt Romney really was made to walk through fire to get this nomination. As we talked about earlier with Sarah, there was a cast of characters that ran for the Republican nomination. And I don't say that derogatorily, I'm just saying they were a very interesting, very diverse group.
Very colorful group.
Very colorful group. It's hard to beat Herman Cain and Newt Gingrich for colorful. Michelle Bachmann, of course, Rick Perry, the governor of Texas, who flamed out, came in like the dark star, and then, within one debate or so, had pretty much, flamed out.
And yet at one point, every one of these people was the front runner.
That's right. It was a case of the Republican electorate taking a really long time to warm up to Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney was a moderate governor of Massachusetts. He has changed his position on important subjects, important issues for conservatives like abortion. He created a universal health care plan in Massachusetts and then disavowed it, even though it was the model for Obamacare. He thinks that's something that states should handle, not the feds. So this was a guy who really had a lot to overcome, including, I might add, his Mormon religion, which for many evangelical voters was a real roadblock.
And yet when we look at the Mormon factor, if you will, it had been thought early on that this was going to be a serious issue. I don't think it turned out to be.
I think you're right. And I think one reason why Mitt Romney's Mormonism did not turn out to be a roadblock for him was twofold. One is that people sort of knew him because he had already run once before, and the issue had been talked about quite a bit. He even gave a major speech on his religion in late 2007. So it was familiar. And the other thing was you cannot underestimate the loathing in some quarters for President Obama. And so, quite frankly, there are a lot of people who, even though they may have problems with Mitt Romney's religion, were willing to overlook that because they really don't like President Obama and they really want to see a change. And so when I've been out among voters, I've really seen that dynamic play out. People have played down the Mormonism and played up their hatred for Obama. Really.
But help me understand one thing. Earlier on, we saw Christian evangelicals essentially describing Mormons as a cult and not being proper Christians, and yet somehow they have been brought into the Romney fold. What did it take to do that?
Well, I really think it took being motivated by the idea that they want the president out of the White House, and they have really decided that they're not voting for a pastor-in-chief or a minister-in-chief, they're voting for a commander-in-chief, and you will hear people say that. And I think that really has motivated those voters to put aside any problems that they have with Mormonism, and trust me, those problems are still out there, and support Mitt Romney.
All right, political writer Robin Abkarian, thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Also, you can see on the board, things are pretty much status quo at the moment in terms of states that have been called for Mitt Romney, states that have been called for President Obama. We'll be updating this regularly. You can also follow along at home at latimes.com. In just a few minutes, I'll be talking about where the various celebrities have come down in terms of the races. But right now, let's go back to Sarah Hashimwaris, who's going to talk about Hollywood and money.
I'm Sarah Hashimwaris with the LA Times, and I'm here with film staff writer Rebecca Keegan. Rebecca is here to talk about Hollywood's evolutionary role within the 2012 presidential campaign. So, Rebecca, we've got Clint Eastwood and his chair on the Republican side, and then the Democratic contender, we've got Oprah, we've got Jay-Z, we've got Beyonce. What sort of evolutionary role are these celebrities playing within this election as compared to previous elections?
Well, it's really interesting. One thing that was the same this year was that Hollywood, for the most part, backed the Democrats. But one thing that was different was the way that they did it. It was a big event in May at George Clooney's house in Studio City, a traditional Hollywood fundraiser in a lot of ways. But what was different was that the Obama campaign had an online contest, so the 99% could participate. They raised $15 million, which is a record-setting amount, and it ended up involving people outside Hollywood, but using that sort of Hollywood star power to get people interested.
Okay, so then that's the Democratic side. What about the Republican presence within Hollywood? Has that changed any?
Well, it was interesting. At the start of this election year, I had Hollywood Republicans telling me that they thought this was actually going to be a real opportunity for the GOP to break into Hollywood. You know, traditionally, it's a Democratic town. Because this is an election that is based so much on the economy, the Hollywood Republicans I talked to said that they thought, you know, people will be sort of more open to a Republican candidate. They're not so interested in the social issues in Hollywood on the right. It hasn't panned out that way. Apart from Clint Eastwood's very memorable speech at the GOP convention, talking to the empty chair, most of the Republicans in Hollywood have been sort of B-list, C-list people who've come out for Romney. I mean, even Honey Boo Boo came out for Barack Obama.
So then on that point of Clint Eastwood, you know, it's been his whole chair bit, it's been fodder for you know, talk shows and SNL and all that kind of stuff. Can you talk a bit about the backlash of celebrities sort of putting their name out there for either campaign?
Well, I mean, this is one of the reasons why campaigns are very careful about which celebrities they use and how much they rely on celebrities. If someone has a positive association with a celebrity, which most people do with George Clooney, it can work to the candidate's benefit. But celebrities don't necessarily follow the scripts the campaigns want them to follow, and that's what you saw happen with Clint Eastwood, where he really did his own thing at the convention, and a lot of people felt this didn't help Mitt Romney one bit.
And then in terms of timing, Steven Spielberg's movie Lincoln, you know, another big presidential Hollywood blockbuster that's supposed to be coming out, has been pushed back till after the election, you know, is completely done with. How do you think that's sort of going to have an impact, if at all any?
Lincoln, which stars Daniel Day-Lewis as our 16th president, will open 4 days after the election. And Spielberg said he did that very deliberately. He didn't want his movie to be used as a political football. Obviously, Lincoln, our country's first Republican president, you could see the GOP claiming him proudly. Many Democrats feel Lincoln has more in common with Democrats today, and Spielberg himself is a liberal and an Obama donor. Spielberg said, look, Lincoln belongs to everybody. I don't want this movie becoming some kind of political issue. Let's release it after the election.
All right, great. Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you.
It's LA, entertainment capital of the world. So, well, we're going to dish a little bit of the dirt right now. To help me do that, I'm joined by entertainment writer and gossip maven, Matt Donnelly. Hiya, Matt.
Hi, David. How are you?
Good. All right, well, let's talk first about celebrities and who they support. On the one hand, you've got George Clooney for President Obama, and the other side, Meatloaf.
Yes, and this is really the heart of election coverage, is really pinning down who gets Lindsay Lohan's vote. So I'm really glad that we're doing this.
She came out for Romney, as a matter of fact.
She actually did. Yes, she did. You know, it's been a very interesting campaign, too, to see how things kind of shaken down. It's obviously Hollywood is known for being a pretty liberal town, and Obama's kind of just a cool president. So it's kind of been in vogue to support him. But really, Clint empty chair Eastwood has opened the door for so many celebrities to come out and support Romney. You know, they might vary in levels of talent and in genres in the business. this, but it's kind of been a really, really interesting season to see who actually wants to support Republicans.
Right,
From
on the
Meatloaf to
Republicans.
Kid Rock,
In
Kid
the past,
Rock,
would be like Stephen Baldwin in the
yes,
past.
noted television ninja Chuck Norris supports Governor Romney, and also some females like Melissa Joan Hart, who's been kind of controversial because of women's reproductive rights. But yeah, people haven't really been shy about going Republican.
Now, what is it that brings a celebrity to the Republican camp? It's not really social issues per se.
Not well. Obviously, in Hollywood, the median household income might not be as big of an issue, so it's really social. And also, there is a kind of big faction of Hollywood that thinks that Obama's made a lot of mistakes, and not so much maybe for Romney, but definitely maybe looking for just change in the current presidency.
Now, anyone who's tried to drive around LA in recent months knows that anytime we have a candidate in town, particularly the president, you know who you are, we get gridlock around here.
Absolutely.
Has it seemed like we've had an unusual number of high power, high wattage fundraisers?
Absolutely, and especially for the president. Throughout this entire re-election campaign, major captains of industry and influencers in culture, like from Harvey Weinstein, prolific movie producer, to Anna Wintour, the editor-in-chief of Vogue, have shut down massive sections of very, very expensive neighborhoods to kind of have the president in. Ryan Murphy, who's the creator of Glee and The New Normal. So yeah, it's been a very, very busy kind of social season in Los Angeles, raising money for the president. And also, I think a big inconvenience for a lot of people too have been the slew of late-night performances or appearances from both candidates, shutting down Hollywood, shutting down Burbank, the studios for Jay Leno, for Jimmy Kimmel. So it's not been the easiest time to be a commuter in Los Angeles.
Considering how much money it takes to be elected president, or really any office at this point, can you do it without going through Hollywood?
I'm not sure if you can, but a lot of the things that it's been interesting, people have been speculating on is what means more from a celebrity, a money donation or actually an endorsement, because it can really go both ways
I'm
for
going to
you.
go with the endorsement.
Okay.
Totally.
Well, that can sometimes slide back. Even as recently as Madonna, who was here in Los Angeles for just a stop on her tour, she's called the president a black Muslim. Before, so attention like that from really controversial figures can almost damage you.
But to be fair to
ways.
Madonna, she said she was kidding.
She did say she was kidding. Yes,
just
she
to
did.
be fair. All right.
Do I look like I'd be unfair to Madonna?
Just saying.
And then even step away from the candidates for a second, and even to other more macro or micro social issues. Gwyneth Paltrow donated $15,000 to help Proposition 37 pass here in Los Angeles or in California, which means that grocers would have to label products that were genetically modified.
Okay.
So everyone's got a special interest.
If we take Clint Eastwood in the chair out of the equation, what was the single most glaring celebrity-related thing of the season?
Oh God. So aside from Clint Eastwood, well, Beyonce and Jay-Z are probably two of the most famous people in the entire world, and their unwavering endorsement of the president always makes international headlines. So that's pretty super glamorous. And so I would say the king and queen of hip hop and film, Beyonce and Jay-Z.
Matt Donnelly, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, anyone who has heard President Obama interviewed knows the man's a little sensitive about his ears, and yet has that stopped political cartoonists from weighing in? Not a chance. And to talk more about that, let's go back to Sarah.
Thanks, David. Two-time Pulitzer Prize winner David Horsey has a unique challenge this evening. As the election results roll in, he has to create a brand new political cartoon, taking it from hazy idea through to finished project. Whether it's Mitt Romney, Barack Obama, or too close to call, he'll be putting pen to paper to sketch out what he sees in his head. But he's not done there. He'll also be writing commentary to go along with the cartoon. David's here now to share with us what he's been working on this evening. Thanks for joining us, David.
I'm happy to be here.
So what are you working on?
Well, this is kind of both the most exciting night and the most challenging night for someone like me, especially a night like this, because I don't think we're going to know what's happening for a while. So I'm sitting here. I woke up this morning in a panic, and I'm still in a panic, but I think there are three likely outcomes. Romney wins, Obama wins, or it goes to the lawyers and judges for weeks to come. And
So do you have sort of a sketch in your head of
well, I have,
one of those three?
I actually have a really rough sketch of it goes to the lawyers, and I don't know if I'd even do this, but this is one I just sketched out a little while ago, and it's Uncle Sam going through all the votes in Ohio and Florida, and this is words no one wants to hear. We're lawyers, and we're here to help. So that may appear somewhere, or that may be it. But so right now I'm in the process of kicking around a lot of ideas, and the problem is, unlike most days where I know what the subject is and what I want to say, I don't know yet what the outcome is going to be, and it could could go very late.
So it's a bit of a toss-up still at this point. But looking back, what were some of your favorite cartoons that you drew throughout the election cycle?
Well, I had several I was happy with, but I wanted to note there are at least 3 that readers seem to really like, and there are various measures of that. I get well over 1 million page views a month, but I judge it by the Facebook recommendations. And I did one recently of on Halloween of Mitt Romney, this pleasant guy giving out candy to kids, and he's in this sort of this haunted house with birthers and people talking about rape doesn't count, and that got about 1,000 Facebook recommendations. And then, but like 2 weeks ago, I did a cartoon that portrayed some of the people who come up with these crazy internet stories about Obama, the socialist, the Kenyan, the Muslim, and I portrayed that as this little rat in a sewer just typing this stuff out as fast as he can. That got 2,000 Facebook recommendations. So that's a pretty good measure, I think, of what people are responding to, and it tends to be the things that are a little more hardcore. I did one last May about Rush Limbaugh when he was making some pretty amazingly stupid and crude remarks about this Georgetown University student who was getting involved in the debate about birth control. That's it. And that one, I can't remember the exact numbers on that, but it may have been 3,000 Facebook recommendations. So that's what I know is going, selling with readers. For me, one I thought worked quite well and actually got a good response was after the first debate, where I was trying to, with each debate, I tried to sum up the whole night in one cartoon. And that one I had poor Mr. Lair being sort of shoved off the stage by Romney, who's sort of taken over, and meanwhile Obama is looking at his watch like George H.W. Bush, wondering when the thing's over. And that got a lot of response. And I've noticed as the campaign has intensified, so has the traffic to my cartoons and columns. It's just people are on this now, and they want to either see what I say to be encouraged or to be outraged. I'm finding my readers are a mix of people who love what I do and those who hate what I do, but they all show up to see what I'm doing.
So then how, can you just sort of walk me through the process of, you've seen a debate, you sort of want to pick one image, one iconic, thing that happened during a debate or, just the election cycle in general, and sort of putting pen to paper and creating an image out of that. What sort of process do you work with?
Well, the process is a little different than, excuse me, in the past. I hope that sound isn't going out and breaking people's ears. But anyway, because my focus since January really has been very closely on the election and on the campaign. Haven't always done that in the past, but so every day I'm getting up thinking what's new, what's happening in the campaign. And then the other new thing for me is to have a column going with every cartoon. So I'm dealing with the same subject in 2 different ways. So I've got these 2 tracks going in my head, but it's pretty straightforward. It's find that what's the hot topic today in politics. What do I think about it, and then what do I want to say? Actually, I find writing is easier because once I figure out what I want to say, I just go. Cartooning, you have to figure out an image that captures that, some simple summation of what it all means, and usually using satire, using exaggeration and irony, and that is a process of sitting and staring out the window or whatever, just sort of brainstorming.
Get the creative juices flowing. So what sort of an impact do you think that political cartoons in general have on voters?
Well, I don't think I've ever changed anyone's mind. At least no one has ever told me. Political cartoons just stir up debate. They are there to keep people engaged, to keep them coming to the newspaper and the website to see what I'm up to next. And as I said, people who agree with me are encouraged. People who disagree seem to enjoy disagreeing with me and writing comments and coming back to call me I'm an idiot every day.
Well, thank you for the insights. We'll, check out what you have in store for us tomorrow.
All right, if I can dream it up.
And now we're going to head back to David, who is at the screen. David?
Thank you, Sarah. I always wished I could be a cartoonist, except I can't draw. Big problem. All right, we're continuing to follow all of the election returns as they come in. Here's a fun fact. Half of the polls nationwide have closed by now. We said it was going to be a close race. How close? Look at this. 67 electoral votes for Romney, 64 electoral votes for Obama. It couldn't get much closer than that. We're going to be watching it develop as we go along. Not a lot of changes since the last time we visited the map. We're seeing the heartland here going fairly predictably towards the Republican camp. New England, over here Indiana in the Democratic camp, and we're seeing the return starting to spread west as the polls close. But it's starting to look like it's going to be a longish evening. Your thoughts, your observations are very welcome at latimes.com/askthetimes. We're also following you on Twitter, where it looks like people are getting a little anxious. For example, Christina has tweeted, anyone else sick with anxiety right now watching the returns? Well, Kevin tweeted to say, it's like watching multiple sports channels, having different scores shown for the same guy being broadcasted. And that's kind of what we're facing right here as well. Your tweets, your comments are very welcome. I'm David Lazarus. We're coming to you from the LA Times newsroom. Our live streaming coverage will continue momentarily. Hey, welcome back to live streaming coverage from the LA Times newsroom, where we're bringing all the resources of the newspaper to bring you up-to-the-minute election returns. You can follow them along yourself at latimes.com, where we have all of our interactive maps. Very latest right now, Republican candidate Mitt Romney pulling ahead in terms of electoral votes. He's got 76 at the moment compared to President Obama's 64. But it is early and too close to call, you could say. We're going to go to Sarah in just a moment for a more in-depth look at the numbers. But first, let's bring back political writer Jim Rainey to take a closer look. Hiya, Jim.
Hey, how you doing?
Good. All right. So let's just kind of step back for a sec and look at some of the more entertaining aspects of this election season. It has been, to say the least, a colorful election. There have been a lot of moments that have really stood out, whether it's 47% or what have you. What jumps out for you?
Well, the 47% certainly was a big moment that no one's going to forget. Mitt Romney, just to remind the few who have forgotten, is at a fundraiser back in May. He's with a bunch of fat cat donors in Florida, and he kind of, what little hair he has, he lets it down a little bit, and he says, gee, there's 47% of the people who aren't going to vote for me. These people are dependent. They're victims. They sort of enjoy being on the government dole. And obviously that led off a sort of 2 or 3 week period coming out of the convention for the Republicans, where it was sort of one mistake after another. He then, of course, recovered with the first debate. But that was probably one of the most memorable. Another one going in the other direction that was very memorable was when President Obama talked about, you didn't build that. Now, some folks felt like in context it made some sense what he was saying. You don't build anything alone. You need help from your neighbors, from the government sometimes.
Roads, schools, hospitals, little things like that.
Exactly. And there was a line that followed that where he talked about the importance of entrepreneurship and taking control of your own life. And that part usually got cut out. But that also did some damage to him. The interesting thing to me about all these moments is we kind of think that they're going to be, that's it. I mean, people, in fact, I get emails from people after the you didn't build that, people saying, Obama's done, forget it, it's over. The same thing with the 47% remark, where a lot of people, pundits, were saying, well, how do you recover from something like that? And what we're seeing tonight with this 50-50 split that we have in the vote is that you do recover. These become like little fragments. People put them all together and then come up, the people in the middle with an idea of how they're going to vote. I don't think any one is kind of determines a vote.
It seems as though the news cycle is incredibly accelerated now. It just moves so fast.
Right.
How big a role does social media play, not just in spreading the word, but also killing the word, thus making these moments that we're talking about, less powerful in terms of drawing blood politically?
Yeah. I think the social media does have that effect. The ones that become the most damaging, of course, are the video. And I think the reason the 47% one was so damaging is that people could look at that video and it had a verite quality to it because it wasn't a scripted moment. It was a moment that you sort of thought you got inside a world that you normally wouldn't be in, where you're here with a bunch of big donors, and here's the candidate saying something that he wouldn't otherwise say. 4 years ago, we had Obama talking about people who became
Prop 33.
Economic circumstances and turned to guns and religion. He later said that that was by far the most damaging moment for him in the 2008 campaign. So those sort of hidden video moments can be very damaging. But again, I think that peeled off some votes for Mitt Romney, but not alone. It's a whole picture that people get. And we've had other video moments. We were talking earlier about during the primary campaign. We had Rick Perry, governor of Texas, who in a very scripted moment at a debate got a little bit excited and talked, he was on kind of a good roll. He was talking about how he would cut government, and he said he was going to name the 3 departments he would cut, and then he got to 2 departments. He got to 2, and then he couldn't come up with a 3rd one.
Oops.
So, yeah, and then he said, oops, and it was, actually, I'll take back what I said before. If there was one moment where you saw someone's campaign sort of disappear
right there before your eyes.
Right there before your eyes. Poor Governor Perry.
And what was particularly extraordinary about that moment is he sort of looked around to the other Republican candidates for help.
Yeah.
Not one of them stepped up.
Right.
They just saw him walking off the edge.
Right. So someone shouted out from one of the other candidates, I forget which one, shouted out EPA. And in fact, the missing department was the Department of Energy. He had named the Department of Commerce, the Department of Education, he wanted to eliminate. And he couldn't come up with the Department of Energy. He remembered it about 15 minutes later in the debate, but by that time everybody had gone drinking and the party was over for Governor Perry.
All right,
So-
Jim Rainey, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
All right, we're going to be continuing to cover the election returns as they come in, and to give us some real-time data right now, let's head over to the big screen with Sarah Hashimoris.
Thanks, David. I am joined by Ben Welsh from our data desk. Ben, thanks for being here with us again. So tell me what we're seeing right now.
Sure. Since I was last here, we've seen a lot of votes come in. There are now more than 20 million votes from around the country have been counted, mostly in East Coast and Central Time Zone states, and you can see them reflected up here on the map. So a number of states have been called for Governor Romney and for President Obama, with Governor Romney holding the current lead with 76 electoral votes. That's based on the strength of a lot of Southern and traditionally Republican states that he's already been projected in the winner as. And President Obama's totals come from the Northeast and his home state of Illinois, states he is also expected to win. All eyes are still on the key battleground states of Ohio, Pennsylvania, Florida, where results are starting to trickle in, but it's really too soon to call.
Too close to call, I was just going to say. So how long do you think we'll need to wait? I mean, is it just sort of a waiting game at this point?
It could really
obviously?
depend on how close it is and how long it takes and how messed up the process was. But if you look here, for instance, at the state of Florida, we can see that more than 50% of the votes have been counted, and President Obama is clinging to a very, very narrow lead of, it looks like, about 3,000 votes. And that's still with, another 50% to come. So that could be a long, long time yet, hours before we sort it all out.
All right, great. I guess we'll just have to wait and see. David, back to you at the desk.
Thanks, Sarah. As you know, we've been going out intermittently to talk to people on the street to get your thoughts on what's going on. You can chime in online at latimes.com/askthetimes. Also, let's hear what someone had to tell us about Prop 37, and that's the one that involves genetically modified foods.
For Prop 37, I voted yes on that. I feel strongly about our foods being genetically modified. Whether or not they're safe or not safe in the long term is to be determined. However, at least labeling them will give people the choice. I don't know how it's going to affect prices so much when if you have $30 million to spend against it, obviously you got money that you don't need to raise the prices. Additionally, the way our public is now, I mean, we put the calories on fast food menus and it still doesn't affect stuff that much. So the people who want to know, and that's important too, at least they can make their choices.
People should have the right to know, like on their labels, whether things have been genetically changed or just basically what they're putting into their bodies. I believe that a lot of illnesses can be caused by change or mutation, and I just think people have the right to know.
So Prop 37 for me just meant that it was going to add some more additional bureaucracy to labeling food and things like that, so I decided to vote no on it.
Prop 37 means to me is that me and my children and my future generation of family and people that I know on this planet get the right to know what type of engineering is being done with our food. I believe that's very important to know. It's extremely important to know.
I am in support of requiring companies to label foods that are genetically modified. My thought is, if there's nothing to hide, then why not just go ahead and label the food so that people can make an informed choice about what they decide to purchase for their family and for themselves and for their health. I've seen the commercials where they say, I hadn't checked this out factually for myself, but I've seen the commercials that say that there are 61 nations already that require that companies like Monsanto and Dow actually, and any other companies out there that do genetic modification, at least label the foods that they genetically modify. I think that's fair. They may find that some people don't care that the food is genetically modified, but they should have the right to know.
Prop 37 means a healthier America to me. I believe that it is every American's right to know what is in our food that we are eating, and they should be labeling it.
It's important to me. I think we all should know if we have foods that's genetically modified. Doesn't mean you don't need to choose it. It's just we have the right to know.
Prop 37 is actually one of the most important on the ballot because it gonna prevent them from, I voted yes, so they can put the labeling, proper labeling, because a lot of the companies just put in their natural and misleading people. And I think it's not right because we have to know what we're really, buying off the shelves. They're putting natural and you think, okay, this is good, this is organic, or in that way, but there is all kinds of GMOs and genetically engineered products in there that I do not want to buy. I'd rather like pay a little more and get the good stuff. So that's why, because we deserve to know.
You know, it wasn't too long ago you bought an orange and you knew you were buying an orange. I voted for 37 because I don't want rat genes in my orange. And I don't trust Monsanto, who funded it. So yes on 37.
37 seems like it's extra stuff that we don't need right now. I think people can, you know, kind of pay attention to what they eat, and we don't need to put special labels on things. If you read most labels anyway, it's all very confusing, so I just think it's something extra that people want that we don't really need.
The Genetic Labeling Act basically is just a big waste of time, being that I'm a pharmacy technician and I have to deal a lot with the FDA. That's something that should have already been on the label, pre-bought. That's something that act was like the 1800s. That's something that should have already been on. So basically it's just the government wants more money. And you know, I don't really make that much, and I'm not willing to give it on something that was already stated a long time ago that the companies actually has to give detailed information, boxed or bagged, on the packages that they come out on.
Columnist Steve Lopez has been all over LA today. He spent part of the day with Republican Party chiefs at the GOP's Pasadena headquarters. Then he checked in at a barbershop in South Central to gauge the feelings of its very opinionated clientele. Among other things, he's been assessing voter sentiment over Prop 30, the measure which would raise taxes to prevent billions in cuts to public education. Steve, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
You've been all over today. Let's start with Tolliver's Barbershop.
Well, you know, California is a blue state, of course, but it's got some red patches, some pink, some turquoise, and in 5 or 10 miles you can travel from one planet to another. And that's how I felt today, going from the GOP headquarters in Pasadena to Tolliver's in South Central. I mean, as I approached, I left a storefront on East Colorado Boulevard in Pasadena with cardboard cutouts of Ronald Reagan and Mitt Romney. And as I approached Tolliver's Barbershop, smoke was rising. They had the barbecue going out back. They had flags. The barber, Mr. Tolliver, was wearing a flag shirt, and everybody wearing Obama t-shirts. So naturally, the comments I got about the election were quite different in these two places.
Yeah, safe to say there is excitement on both sides, though?
They were both planning a party, but preparing for a funeral. That's how they phrased it. And I think that in Pasadena, they were a little more concerned about the outcome tonight.
And then on to the California Clean Money campaign. You spoke with some people about that earlier today as well.
Yeah, well, you know, when you look at the money that is poured into this campaign, and in particular, that shadowy $11 million fund that came out of Arizona at the last minute in support of props, in support of Prop 32 and against Prop 30, and nobody knows where it came from, and even a court ruling doesn't clear up the matter. That was a little bit of fodder for the folks who are trying to get full disclosure. And late last year, a bill by a legislator by the name of Brownlee, running for Congress now, almost made it. It got through the Assembly but didn't make it to the Senate in time, and the folks who run the Clean Money campaign in California are hoping that that's just a little bit more ammo for them to run this thing back out there next time and get full disclosure. So we can't have this kind of thing happen where $11 million flies in to support or attack a cause and we don't even know where the money came from.
So Steve, can you give us a quick and dirty rundown of Prop 30? What does it entail? Who's paying attention to it? You know, it's a very significant prop for California voters.
Well, you know, there's been a lot of excitement generated and a lot of money spent. Again, boy, if we had the money spent on and against Prop 30 to support the schools, they might not be in the trouble they're in. This, of course, is Jerry Brown's budget balancing maneuver. The current budget includes the $6 billion that would be raised by Prop 30, and he's counting on that, and without it, it would be possibly a $6 billion cut mid-year, mid-school year for schools. And the schools that would be hit hardest by this are K through 12 and also community colleges. And you know, you had asked about interest in this election among young folks. And when I went to Glendale Community College, they had banners out. They were having a panel on Prop 30. They were trying to get students to turn out the vote to support 30, because without it, at the community colleges, it's about a $350 million cut. And they're in a situation now where it's difficult to get classes because so many have been cut in recent years. And then at the K through 12 level, California has lost over 30,000 teachers in the last 4 or 5 years. And if Prop 30 goes down, there's a chance we're going to lose more.
And a recent poll found that 18 to 34-year-olds, those young voters, plan to vote yes for Prop 30.
That would make sense, especially if they are in school or on their way to community college.
All right, great. Thank you, Steve. We're now going to head back to David at the screen.
Thanks, Sarah. Lots of big news to tell you about. Let's bring you all up to speed. We got some biggies right here. New York has been called for President Obama. Michigan has been called for President Obama. Michigan, of course, home of the U.S. car industry. There's a whole lot of talk about the bailout. That was a big factor in all of this. But look at this big red stripe down the center of the country. Texas, a big dog out there, that's been called for Mitt Romney. Also, we're looking at Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, South Dakota, and North Dakota. Over here, we've got Wyoming. All have been called for Republican candidate Mitt Romney. The South hasn't changed that much over here. South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, solidly in the Republican camp. President Obama's home state, Illinois, that's gone his way. New England going heavily Democratic at the moment. A lot of the big swing states still in play. So Colorado, the polls are closed there. No word yet on how things are going. Ohio, hard to say there as well. Virginia, Florida, those have been going back and forth throughout the evening as we've been watching. I wouldn't even hazard a call on any of these yet, but look at the electoral vote counts at the moment. Mitt Romney, 141. President Obama, 109. It looks like Romney's pulling ahead, but I gotta say, it is early in the evening and still too close to call. And as we say, these big swing states, those are going to be the real deciders here. And a lot of people say that if Mitt Romney can't get 2 out of the big 3, Ohio, Virginia, and Florida, it's going to be real tough for him. But we just don't know quite yet. We're going to be following this throughout the evening from the LA Times newsroom. Stick around for that. I'm David Lazarus. See you momentarily.
And welcome back, guys. To give us a breakdown of how measures are likely to do, we turn to Sacramento Bureau Chief Evan Halper and Pat Morrison, who are joining us live with a Google Hangout. Thanks for being here, guys.
Of course.
So, Evan, we'll start with you. What's the sentiment like right now in Sacramento?
Well, there's a lot of very close ballot races, and people are watching a bunch of them really closely. One of them being, of course, the death penalty. Polls show that Californians may be ready to repeal the death penalty, which would be a very big deal. A lot of the political people are watching more closely Proposition 30, which is Governor Jerry Brown's tax measure. He was really struggling a few weeks ago, and it didn't have 50%. And it's very rare for a tax measure to climb back up after it's dropped below 50%. But the governor got on the stump. He's been campaigning like crazy the last few days, and the internal tracking polls appear to be showing that he's close to that 50% he needs to pass the measure. So that's going to be a really close one. It could be really late before we have results for that.
I have to jump in because I think Evan will agree that the governor's most effective campaigner has been his dog Sutter, who has been going out on the campaign trail on behalf of Prop 30.
Absolutely. It's interesting because there was a lot of conventional wisdom was saying, oh, the governor should have been out earlier, he should have been doing this or that. And the governor just held his fire, and, he's a one-man band. And his dog has been, a very effective campaigner. Pat, you're right. And, he just refused to listen to the advice of the pundits and the people around him other than his inner circle. And it appears that he was right to wait until he started campaigning until the very end.
So, dog aside, Pat, can you start us off with a rundown of some of the other measures that California voters are really keeping an eye on?
Well, Proposition 38 is the other tax measure for schools. Molly Munger, the subtext of this is that you have essentially two billionaire siblings, Molly Munger and her brother Charles Munger Jr., who are on opposite sides of the fence politically. In this particular match, Molly Munger putting a lot of her money toward this school's tax measure, which is a graduated income tax measure. Jerry Brown's is both a tax and is both an income tax and a sales tax, each of which has a sunsetting clause of 4 and 7 years, respectively. So the end of the tunnel is built into Jerry Brown's as well. And there's Prop 32, which is maybe the biggest spending proposition, which says that unions cannot then take money from, even with, I believe, the consent of their union members, take money out of their paychecks for political purposes, because union money is really the single biggest source of Democratic money in politics in California and in many places around the country.
Evan, care to weigh in?
Yeah, Proposition 32 was definitely the most expensive measure this year. I think more than $100 million will have been spent on it by the end. Sort of the excitement of it fizzled a few weeks ago when polls started to show that it just looked like it was not going to pass. Unions had smothered the opposition side with spending. Interesting thing there, that was bankrolled by Charles Munger Jr., a big Republican activist. He spent tens of millions of dollars on that measure. And the other education tax measure that Pat was just talking about, Proposition 38, which also did not look like, the prospects did not look good from the polls we saw in the LA Times poll. That was bankrolled by his sister, who spent, I think it was $47 million last time I checked. The Mungers are big up there in spending on California ballot propositions this year.
And then, Evan, on the point of money and props, 6 propositions have been funded mostly by individual millionaires or billionaires. Can you talk a bit about who's pumping money into what prop?
Yeah, this is something that comes up every year in California, that there's an election. It costs $2 to $4 million to get the signatures to get a measure on the ballot. But if you can change law in California, it's a bargain for some of these people who have tens of millions of dollars, if not hundreds of millions of dollars, to burn. So this year there's 11 measures on the ballot. One of them is a referendum. So there's effectively really 10 initiatives. Of those 10 initiatives, 6 of them were put there by, at least 6 of them were put there by deep-pocketed individuals. There's the Mungers we just mentioned. George Joseph, 91-year-old insurance executive of Mercury Insurance. He has a Proposition 33, which voters probably are pretty hazy on the details of, but involves how car insurance is structured. He spent more than $16 million on that. Chris Kelly, former Facebook chief privacy officer. He ran for attorney general, lost in the Democratic primary in 2010 to Kamala Harris. Still wants to be active in politics, obviously. He put a couple of $1 million into getting the human trafficking initiative on the ballot, Proposition 35, which would increase penalties for human trafficking. And then there's Tom Steyer, Bay Area hedge fund manager, manages one of the largest hedge funds in the world, active in Democratic politics, spoke at the Democratic National Convention. He put in more than $30 million into Proposition 39, which changes the tax code, and it's complicated, but it results in a $1 billion tax increase for a bunch of companies that are based out of state. And with that $1 billion, they would put half of it for 5 years into this green buildings program that's kind of a pet project of Steyer's. So, you put $30 million in, you get $2.5 billion for your new government program. So it's a pretty good deal.
This is like the 100th anniversary. We just celebrated the 100th anniversary of the initiative, the referendum, and the recall process in California, where it is up to the voters, as Evan was saying, on these initiatives, it's in these referenda, brought forward and put on the ballot, sometimes by people with a lot of money who have a lot to gain. And there's been questions raised about whether or not this whole process, which was designed to get around vested interest and special interest, is now back in the hands of vested interest and special interest. But generally, Californians vote no 2/3 of the time on these ballot measures. They're not nuanced. They're often very, non-subtle. We're making policy by sledgehammer rather than by scalpel. And Californians have tended to say no on these. We'll see whether this ballot go-around happens to be in line with those.
Sure, we'll wait and see till polls close and results come in. Evan Halper from Sacramento and Pat Morrison. We're now going to go to Matea Gold in D.C.
Well, this presidential election is on track to cost a record $6 billion. That's according to the nonpartisan research group, the Center for Responsive Politics. That is going to make it the most expensive election in U.S. history, topping the previous record set in 2008 by $700 million. Spending for the presidential campaign alone is probably going to be $2.6 billion, which is actually down slightly from 2008 when both parties had contested primaries. And if we take a look at the spending by both Obama and Romney for all of the urgent warnings they were sending their supporters in the final weeks of the campaign that they were going to be outspent, both candidates ended up with roughly equal resources to bring to bear in this campaign. Obama, by mid-October, had raised more than $1 billion for his campaign and various party committees. Romney was not far behind with roughly $925 million. That's according to the Campaign Finance Institute, which runs these kinds of numbers. But if we take a look at where they got their money, there's a really big difference. Obama raised the bulk of his money, or a much larger share of his money, in small donations, more than $214 million, which gave him a lot more flexibility about how to use that money. That's because small donations went directly to his campaign committee, and his campaign could really decide to put that into ground game, into ads, wherever they thought was most appropriate. Romney, on the other hand, relied more heavily on large donations, checks of up to 5 figures, and whenever he got checks that large, the bulk of that money had to go to the party committees, which really limited his ability to have direct control on how to spend that money. The sources of money were also very different for both the candidates. Wall Street, which had really backed Obama strongly in 2008, pretty much all but abandoned him in this election and went to Romney. Obama, on the other hand, had really strong support, once again, from lawyers and from the education sector. Interestingly, the top employer of donors to Obama was the UC system in California, and several other universities were also among the top employers of his donors. He also got strong support from tech companies such as Microsoft and Google. Romney, as we said, had a lot of strong support from Wall Street and from the finance sector in general. Among the top employers of his donors were banks such as Bank of America, Citibank, JP Morgan Chase. The biggest driver by far of the record cost of this election has been the role of outside groups, which have really made up a new center of gravity in this political campaign. The Center for Responsive Politics estimates that super PACs and tax-exempt advocacy groups together are going to report spending close to $970 million on this election. And that's really only one part of their spending. There are perhaps hundreds of millions of dollars more that they're spending on issue ads and voter contacts such as phone banks that they do not have to report to the Federal Election Commission. So we're really seeing this power center develop of super PACs and outside groups, which are on track to spend probably over $1 billion to influence this race. The reason for this are really several federal court decisions that came down in 2010. Citizens United is the one that most people are familiar with. It allowed corporations for the first time really in a century to spend direct money on political activity. But a lesser known court ruling also had a really big impact. That was a case called Speech Now, which allowed wealthy donors, or rather anybody, but primarily wealthy donors have taken advantage of this, to pool their money and spend unlimited sums on campaigns. And in the past, when people wanted to get together and do this, they had to form a traditional political action committee, and they were limited to giving $5,000 increments. Now, if you have a so-called super PAC, you can donate as much as you want. So we saw massive donations from billionaires such as Sheldon Adelson, who's given close to $50 million in reported donations to super PACs this cycle. So these groups have really had a huge impact on influencing the narrative of the 2012 election. We saw in the Republican primaries, the pro-Romney super PAC Restore Our Future really provided essential air cover for him and really helped vanquish all of his rivals for the GOP nomination. And in the general election, Obama, who has really dominated Romney on the airwaves, has had to contend with a huge assault from conservative outside groups that have really had Romney's back on the air. Now, it remains to be seen what the final impact of all of this involvement is going to be. Some media strategists believe that having so many groups pushing so many messages on the air at the same time can create a real muddle and a lot of noise for voters, and it also contributed to the negative tone of this campaign and perhaps made it more difficult for Romney to get across a positive message. But there's no question that these groups are now, barring further court rulings, here to stay. Organizations such as Americans for Prosperity, which does not report its donors but has been known to get support from the conservative Koch brothers, is already making plans for how to influence policy debates after the election. And the two Crossroads groups, which were co-founded by Republican strategist Karl Rove, are also making plans to have a permanent presence in Washington. I'm Matea Gold here in Washington. Thank you very much.
And I'm back at our awesome interactive map with our awesome data team expert, Ben Welch. Ben, what are we seeing right now within the balance of power when it comes to the Senate?
That's right. The presidential race isn't the only thing at stake tonight. Also at stake is control of both the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate, the legislative bodies. Currently, the Republicans control the House and the Democrats control the Senate. But there was some concern coming in today that the Democrats may lose that control of the Senate. However, the early results we're seeing tonight are in their favor. They've already been called the winners of a number of crucial races, including a Connecticut race where they defeated the Republican challenge of the wife of World Wrestling Entertainment owner Vince McMahon. And in West Virginia, where Joe Manchin, the incumbent, and a Democrat, was able to win re-election despite West Virginia going to Governor Romney at the presidential level. So you saw in that case, the state going for one party at the presidential level and another at the Senate. And there's two very closely watched races, which are too close to call at this point, but are looking good for the Democrats. First, you can see that Elizabeth Warren is out to a strong lead against Scott Brown in Massachusetts, trying to win back that seat for the Democrats. And then also in the state of Missouri, Claire McCaskill is looking strong in her defense against Todd Akin, a Tea Party favorite. And another Tea Party candidate, Richard Murdoch, in Indiana, looks like he may be on his way to defeat as well. So if all this holds up, which it still might change, but if it holds up, it looks like there's a good shot for the Democrats to hold the Senate tonight.
And then on the presidential level, what are we looking at right now?
Sure. So, not a whole lot has changed since we last looked. We've had some more states close in the Middle West and into the Great Plains. Many of them, the larger ones here, going to Governor Romney. However, not many people live in those states, so the electoral, victory for him isn't all that great. But he is currently ahead in the electoral vote, thanks to them, 153 to 123. But we've yet to really see any of the battleground states that are most closely contested be called. We're still waiting on results from Ohio, Pennsylvania, Florida, Iowa, Wisconsin, all these states that are very closely watched. And Florida is really shaping up to be maybe the closest race of the night, with nearly 80% of precincts now reporting. President Obama is leading by, only looks like about 14,000 votes. And
so too close to call the magic words for right now. We're going to head to David at the desk.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Okay, well, the producers who pulled this together said, porn stars, condoms, let's get David to talk about it. And here I am. Anyway, I'm joined by Ron Lynn. He's one of our government writers. We're talking about Measure B. That's something that's up for grabs here in LA County. And, well, let's face it, LA is the porn capital of at least the United States, if not the world. A lot of product comes out of this area, and a lot of concern about the health of actors and actresses in this industry. Specifically, we're talking about HIV, AIDS, and other sexually transmitted diseases. What Measure B would do was bring condoms, make them a mandatory thing. Talk more about that. Ron Lynn, is this really something that government needs to get involved in?
Well, that's the stance of the AIDS Healthcare Foundation, which has been advocating on behalf of AIDS patients since the 80s. They say that someone needs to look out for their health, just like the government needs to look out for the health of construction workers by requiring them to wear safety hats.
Do we have any data on what percentage of porn stars actually contract HIV, AIDS, or other STDs?
Well, what we do know is that over the years there have been a number of cases, and there have been situations where the industry has had to suspend filming to investigate HIV cases. But there was one case in 2004 where an adult film actor gave HIV to 3 female actresses, and then there was another case in 2010 where an adult film actor contracted HIV.
The porn industry has said consistently, straight down the line, look, we can police ourselves, we can take care of this ourselves. Can't they?
Well, that's what they say. They say that there doesn't need to be the creation of a government bureaucracy that the industry does not want. And you have the AIDS activists and the adult film actors who have contracted HIV saying, it's different when you get HIV. When you get HIV, everything changes. Someone's got to look out for these adult film actors.
And yet a number of porn stars haven't been shy about tweeting their feelings about this, many of which, those still working in the industry, have been against Measure B. I'm looking at one here. It's one of the few that we can read, by the way. This one's from someone named Ashley Madison, who I do not know, thank you. And she writes, I don't know why people who do not watch porn get to decide what to do with our bodies. Which I guess is one way of looking at it, and yet at the same time, this is a public health issue.
Right, that's right. I mean, the way that the AIDS activist, the AIDS Healthcare Foundation puts it, back in the 80s, no one was really looking out for people who are contracting HIV in bathhouses, and this is something they know that how people feel about adult film actors isn't perhaps the greatest thing in the world, but they feel like someone needs to look out for them.
What does the polling tell us about Measure B?
Well, there was initial polling that came out showing very strong support with a 55%. But in the last couple of weeks, the race has tightened a bit, where the support level, this is internal polling by the pro-Measure B people, it fell to 51%. So we'll see what happens. It looks like the race was tightening, and we'll see what happens tonight.
All right, Ron Lynn, thank you very much for joining us. Looking at the map right now, Obama, 123 electoral votes, Romney, 153, but it is increasingly looking like, and some networks have called, Pennsylvania for President Obama. Again, we're not calling that ourselves. We rely on the AP for that, but that has been called by some of the networks. That's a very big deal if so, because if Pennsylvania goes President Obama's way, that would make Ohio even more important as a must-win state for Mitt Romney. So we'll be following that as we go along. I'm David Lazarus. This is continuing coverage of the election from the LA Times newsroom. We'll be back momentarily.